The drought of 2024 would reveal many secrets across America, but none more shocking than what emerged from the receding waters of Lake Superior. On a scorching August morning, two hikers exploring the newly exposed shoreline of Madeline Island stumbled upon a small cave entrance that had been underwater for decades. Inside, wrapped in deteriorating plastic, was a waterproof bag marked with faded letters T. Olson, 1991. The discovery would unravel a 33-year-old mystery and expose a web of lies that had protected a killer who'd risen to the highest levels of the National Park Service. Before we begin the story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We're really curious where you're tuning in from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a rating. August 15, 1991 had started like any other summer day in Bayfield, Wisconsin. The small tourist town on the shores of Lake Superior was bustling with visitors eager to explore the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore. Among them were Tyler Olson and Brandon Mueller, graduate students from the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Environmental Science program. Tyler, 24 years old, had spent the summer documenting the ecological impact of increased boat traffic around the islands. His research partner, Brandon, 2 years older, focused on sediment patterns and erosion. They'd rented kayaks dozens of times that summer from Peterson's Marina, where Derek Peterson knew them by name. That morning, the Nirvana cassette playing in Brandon's beat-up Honda Civic set the mood as they drove to the marina. Tyler had been unusually quiet during the ride, clutching his waterproof camera bag. 3 days earlier, he'd mentioned to their professor something about disturbing activity near Devil's Island, but hadn't elaborated. Brandon had noticed Tyler making several calls from the payphone outside their motel the previous evening, feeding quarters into the machine with increasing agitation. At 7:30 a.m., they signed the rental log at Peterson's Marina. Derek Peterson, running the morning shift, barely looked up from his copy of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. The headline screamed something about Desert Storm veterans returning home. Business had been good that summer, though Derek had his own concerns. His expansion plans for the marina required serious capital, and certain unofficial midnight boat rentals to parties who preferred no questions asked had been helping fund that dream. Tyler and Brandon stopped at Eddie's bait shop for supplies. The security camera, one of the few VHS recording systems in town, captured them buying water bottles, power bars, and film for Tyler's camera. Brandon chatted with Eddie about the Brewers' chances while Tyler stood apart, studying a nautical map taped to the wall. Ashley Caldwell entered the shop moments after they'd left, her park ranger uniform crisp despite the morning humidity. She'd just started her internship with the Park Service that summer, fresh out of college at 23, eager to protect the wilderness she'd grown up loving. The last confirmed sighting of both kayakers came at 2:47 p.m. from the Apostle Islands cruise boat Island Princess. Several tourists would later recall seeing two kayaks near Stockton Island, though one passenger, vacationing fisherman Chad Beauregard from Louisiana, would insist months later that he'd seen 3 people on the island's shore through his binoculars. But his statement wouldn't be taken seriously until 2024. Brandon Mueller appeared at the marina alone at 8:15 p.m., soaking wet and frantic. His story was compelling and tragic. A sudden squall had separated them near Stockton Island around 4 p.m. The notorious Lake Superior weather, which had claimed the Edmund Fitzgerald just 16 years earlier, had struck again. Tyler's kayak had capsized in the heavy waves. Brandon had tried to reach him, but the conditions were too severe. By the time the storm passed, Tyler was gone. The Coast Guard search began immediately. Helicopters swept the area, while boats crisscrossed the suspected zone. They found Tyler's kayak 2 days later, washed up on Oak Island, its hull cracked. Some personal items were recovered. His University of Wisconsin student ID, a half-eaten power bar, and, strangely, a Polaroid photo of what appeared to be barrels near a dock, though the image was too water-damaged to make out details. The search continued for 2 weeks before being called off. Tyler Olson was presumed drowned, another victim of Lake Superior's temperamental nature. His parents held a memorial service in Madison. His girlfriend, devastated, left graduate school. Life moved on. Brandon Mueller's life certainly did. He used Tyler's research data, which he claimed they'd developed together, to complete his dissertation. By 1993, he'd earned his PhD and landed a position with the EPA's Great Lakes Division. His career trajectory was remarkable. EPA Regional Director by 1999, consultant to 3 governors, and, by 2020, Deputy Director of the National Park Service overseeing the entire Great Lakes region. Derek Peterson expanded his marina into the largest operation in Bayfield. By the late 1990s, Peterson's marina was the gateway to the Apostle Islands, with a fleet of rental boats, a restaurant, and a hotel. Derek became a pillar of the community, serving on the town council and donating generously to local causes. Ashley Caldwell's career was equally impressive. After her internship, she was hired full-time by the Park Service. She worked her way up through various postings around the country, earning commendations for her conservation work. By 2015, she'd returned to Wisconsin as superintendent of the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, the very waters where Tyler had disappeared. For 33 years, the story remained unchanged. Tyler Olson was a cautionary tale about respecting Lake Superior. Brandon Mueller would occasionally speak at water safety seminars, his voice catching when he described that terrible day. Derek Peterson would shake his head sadly when tourists asked about dangers on the lake. Ashley Caldwell kept a photo of all the people lost to the lake in her office, Tyler's picture among them. Then came the drought of 2024, the worst in recorded history. It dropped Lake Superior's water level by nearly 3 feet. Shorelines not seen since the 1920s emerged. Shipwrecks appeared like ghosts. And on Madeline Island, a small cave entrance was exposed on the northeastern shore in an area that would have been under 6 feet of water in 1991. The hikers who found the bag immediately contacted authorities. Inside, protected by multiple layers of plastic and a military surplus dry bag, were 3 film canisters, a notebook wrapped in plastic, and a micro-cassette recorder with a tape still inside. The items were rushed to the FBI's Milwaukee field office. The developed film would shock investigators. 36 frames showed clear images of blue barrels being offloaded from a boat at night. The dock was identifiable, a private structure that in 1991 belonged to Peterson's marina. The notebook, in Tyler's handwriting, documented dates, times, and boat registration numbers. He'd been tracking illegal chemical dumping in the waters around the Apostle Islands. The last entry was dated August 14, 1991. Finally have enough proof. Meeting with contact tomorrow who can help expose this. Can't trust anyone at the university. Brandon's been acting strange since I mentioned my suspicions. The microcassette was the most damning. Tyler's voice, young and frightened, recorded on August 15, 1991. It's approximately 3:30 p.m. I'm on Stockton Island. Brandon brought me here, but something's wrong. There's someone else here, a woman in a ranger uniform. Brandon keeps saying we need to talk about my research, but this isn't about research. I'm going to try to get back to my kayak. If something happens to me, know that... The recording cut off. The investigation that followed was swift and comprehensive. The FBI, working with cold case specialists, began piecing together what really happened on August 15, 1991. The FBI's investigation began with Brandon Mueller, now 59, and living in a lakefront mansion in Minneapolis. When agents arrived at his office in the federal building, he maintained his story with practiced ease. Yes, there had been a storm. No, he hadn't known about Tyler's investigation into illegal dumping. The agents showed him the Polaroid found in his car after Tyler's disappearance, now enhanced with modern technology. The barrels were clearly visible, as was a partial license plate of a boat registered to Peterson's marina. Brandon's demeanor shifted. His lawyer, arrived within the hour, advised him to stop talking, but the damage was done. Phone records from 1991, archived on microfiche and newly digitized, showed Brandon had made 17 calls to Peterson's marina in the week before Tyler's death, not to the public line, but to Derek's private office number. Derek Peterson, 61 and battling diabetes, was questioned at his Bayfield home. The FBI had already pulled Coast Guard records from 1991. No small craft advisory had been issued for August 15th. No storms were reported. The weather had been, in the technical terminology, dead calm, with waves under 1 foot. Derek's first response was to blame faulty memory after 3 decades. Then he pivoted to attacking Tyler's character, suggesting the young man had been involved with drugs, though no evidence had ever supported this. The investigation took an unexpected turn when agents discovered Derek had been in Green Bay on August 15, 1991. Hospital records confirmed he'd been admitted for emergency appendectomy at 11 a.m. and wasn't discharged until August 17. Multiple witnesses, including nurses and his insurance company, verified this. It was impossible for Derek to have been on Lake Superior that day. Ashley Caldwell volunteered to assist the investigation immediately. As superintendent of the park, she had access to historical records and offered to compile everything from 1991. She was professional, helpful, and sympathetic. She remembered Tyler vaguely from that summer, she said, though they'd never really interacted. She'd been just an intern, focused on interpretive programs for tourists. But something bothered the lead investigator about the rental log from Peterson's marina. In the margin, in faded pencil, someone had written AS3P next to Tyler and Brandon's rental. Derek Peterson, when shown the log, said it was probably inventory notation, though he couldn't recall the specific meaning. The handwriting didn't match Derek's or any of his regular employees from 1991. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Chad Beauregard, the Louisiana fisherman from the tour boat, was still alive at 78. When contacted by the FBI, he was vindicated and eager to help. He'd kept a journal of his fishing trip, as he did for all his travels. On August 15, 1991, he'd written, "Saw something odd near Stockton Island. 2 kayaks pulled up, but there were 3 people on shore. One in a tan ranger uniform, looked like an argument. Tour guide said it was probably researchers, but something felt wrong." The FBI pulled Ashley Caldwell's employment records. In August 1991, she'd been assigned to interpretive programs based at the Visitor Center in Bayfield, but her time cards showed something interesting. She'd taken a personal day on August 15, 1991. When questioned about this, Ashley said she couldn't remember what she'd done that specific day 33 years ago. Reasonable enough, except she'd earlier claimed to have been working at the Visitor Center that entire week. Investigators dug deeper into Ashley's background. In 1991, she'd been 23, fresh out of UW-Stevens Point with a degree in natural resources. She'd grown up in Ashland, Wisconsin, 40 miles from Bayfield. Her family was well known in the area. Her father ran a struggling dairy farm. Her older brother, Tommy Caldwell, had been 26 in 1991, recently back from the Gulf War with the Marines. Tommy Caldwell's story was tragic and typical of the era. He'd come back from Desert Storm with untreated PTSD, couldn't hold a job, and fell into the methamphetamine trade that was just beginning to explode across rural Wisconsin. By 1993, he'd been arrested for manufacturing meth in a barn on the family's property. He served 5 years in federal prison. Ashley had never mentioned her brother in any background checks or security clearances, claiming they'd been estranged since childhood. But property records told a different story. In September 1991, just 3 weeks after Tyler's disappearance, the Caldwell family farm had suddenly paid off $180,000 in debt. Ashley's father claimed it was an inheritance from a relative, but no probate record supported this. Tommy Caldwell had purchased a new Chevy Silverado with cash that same month. The FBI obtained a warrant for Tommy Caldwell's financial records from 1991. What they found was shocking. Tommy had been using the remote islands of the Apostle Islands chain as transfer points for methamphetamine production and distribution. The operation was sophisticated for its time, using kayaks and small boats to move product between islands, avoiding the main channels monitored by the Coast Guard. On August 12, 1991, Tyler Olson had photographed more than just illegal chemical dumping. In the background of several frames, enhanced using modern techniques, were visible bags and equipment consistent with meth production. Tyler might not have even realized what he'd captured, focused as he was on the environmental crimes. The FBI theorized that someone had recognized the implications of Tyler's photos. If he went public with evidence of illegal dumping, the additional scrutiny would inevitably uncover the drug operation. For Tommy Caldwell's network, which was generating hundreds of thousands of dollars, this was an existential threat. Phone records showed Ashley Caldwell had called her brother from a payphone in Bayfield at 11:47 p.m. on August 14, 1991. The call lasted 18 minutes. The next morning, she'd taken her personal day. She'd also signed out a Park Service motorboat for resource surveying, though no official survey was scheduled. Brandon Mueller's connection became clearer when investigators found his graduate school financial records. In 1991, he'd been deeply in debt, nearly $40,000 in student loans with no way to pay them. His family was working class from Milwaukee, unable to help. But in October 1991, he'd suddenly paid off all his debts. He'd told friends he'd received a grant, but no such grant existed in university records. The FBI reconstructed the probable sequence of events. Tyler had confided in Brandon about his discovery, not knowing Brandon was already compromised. Whether Brandon was involved in the dumping or was simply bought off after the fact remained unclear. Brandon had convinced Tyler they needed to document more evidence, suggesting a kayak trip to get closer photos. He then informed Derek Peterson, who was allowing the dumping for payment, and Derek had contacted Ashley, knowing her brother's operation was at risk. Ashley had intercepted them on Stockton Island with the Park Service boat. The plan might have been to simply threaten Tyler, to destroy his evidence and ensure his silence. But something had gone wrong. Tyler had tried to escape, realizing he'd been set up. In the ensuing confrontation, Tyler had ended up dead. The microcassette recorder, found in the dry bag, had one more crucial piece of evidence. After the initial recording cut off, there was 40 minutes of blank tape. Then, barely audible, Tyler's voice again, weaker, hidden the evidence in the cave on Madeline Island's north shore. If anyone finds this, know that Ashley Caldwell and Brandon Mueller killed me. It's about drugs, not environmental dumping. Her brother Tommy is... The tape ended. When confronted with this evidence, Brandon Mueller finally broke. Through his lawyer, he offered to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. His story filled in the remaining gaps. According to Brandon, he'd never intended for Tyler to die. Derek Peterson had been paying him to look the other way about the chemical dumping, money Brandon desperately needed. When Tyler discovered the dumping, Brandon had tried to dissuade him from reporting it. But Tyler was idealistic and stubborn. Brandon had made the fatal mistake of mentioning Tyler's discovery to Derek, who'd immediately contacted Ashley about the threat to her brother's operation. The plan had been to scare Tyler into silence. Ashley would confront them on the island, claiming she'd been monitoring illegal activity and that Tyler's research permit would be revoked if he didn't cooperate. But Tyler had recognized Ashley from somewhere, possibly from seeing her near her brother's operation. He tried to run back to his kayak. In the struggle, Ashley had struck him with a paddle. Tyler had fallen, hitting his head on rocks. Brandon swore Tyler was still alive when they left him on the island. Ashley had said she'd take Tyler to the hospital in her park service boat. Brandon was told to paddle back alone and report Tyler missing in a storm. It would be his word against Tyler's if Tyler tried to report what happened, and Brandon had Derek and Ashley backing his story. But Tyler never made it to any hospital. Ashley had taken him to Madeline Island, where he died from his injuries. She'd sealed the cave entrance with rocks and debris, thinking the evidence would be lost forever. The Caldwell family farm records revealed the full scope of the operation. Tommy Caldwell had been producing nearly 50 pounds of methamphetamine per month by late 1991, using precursor chemicals stolen from the same industrial sources that were dumping waste through Peterson's marina. It was a perfect symbiotic relationship. The chemical companies got rid of evidence, Derek got paid for late-night boat rentals, Tommy got raw materials, and everyone stayed quiet. Ashley Caldwell's arrest at the superintendent's office of Apostle Islands National Lakeshore made national headlines. The image of the respected park official, now 56, with graying hair and numerous conservation awards on her wall, being led away in handcuffs while tourists watched in shock, became the defining moment of the case. She'd spent 33 years building a career on the grave of the man she'd killed, eventually becoming guardian of the very waters where she'd committed murder. The final pieces of evidence were overwhelming. The FBI found Ashley's fingerprints on the rocks that had sealed the cave on Madeline Island. Mineral analysis showed the rocks hadn't come from that area naturally, but had been deliberately placed. The Park Service boat she'd signed out on August 15, 1991, had been decommissioned in 1998, but maintenance records from 1991 showed it had been returned with damage to the hull consistent with running aground on Madeline Island's rocky shore. Tommy Caldwell, now 59 and living in a trailer in rural Iron County, Wisconsin, was arrested simultaneously. The years hadn't been kind to him. After his release from federal prison in 1998, he'd struggled with addiction and mental health issues. When FBI agents arrived, he seemed almost relieved. He'd been carrying the weight of his sister's actions for 3 decades, though he claimed he hadn't known Tyler had been killed until reading about the dry bag discovery in the news. Tommy's confession revealed the broader network. The meth operation had involved 12 people across northern Wisconsin and Minnesota's Arrowhead region. They'd used the islands as drop points, knowing the Park Service had limited resources to patrol the vast area. The operation had generated nearly $2 million between 1990 and 1993 when federal agents had finally shut it down, though they'd never known about the murder that had protected it in its crucial early phase. Derek Peterson's role became clearer through financial forensics. He'd been taking payments from multiple sources, chemical companies needing to dump waste, drug dealers needing untraceable boat rentals, and occasionally people who needed boats for other illegal activities. His marina's legitimate success had been built on a foundation of crime. Though Derek couldn't be charged with Tyler's murder due to his alibi, he faced federal charges for conspiracy and racketeering. At 61 and in poor health, he was looking at dying in prison. The investigation revealed how Ashley had manipulated the aftermath perfectly. She'd volunteered for the search efforts, using her position to steer boats away from Madeline Island. She'd comforted Tyler's parents when they'd come to Bayfield, even helping them pack up his belongings from the motel. She'd written a touching tribute to Tyler for the park newsletter, praising his dedication to environmental protection. Most disturbingly, Ashley had built her entire career on environmental conservation, becoming a respected voice for protecting the Great Lakes. She'd given hundreds of presentations about water safety, often mentioning the tragic loss of Tyler Olson as a cautionary tale. She'd established a memorial scholarship in his name at UW-Madison. The psychological audacity of it stunned even veteran investigators. Brandon Mueller's final confession, given over 3 days in October 2024, revealed the human cost of that day. He'd never slept well again, he said. Every career advancement felt like blood money. His marriage had failed in 2001, his wife sensing the darkness he carried but never understanding its source. He'd been in therapy for decades, telling therapists about survivor's guilt from losing his research partner, never able to confess the truth. Brandon described the moment on Stockton Island when everything went wrong. Tyler had recognized Ashley and immediately understood the connection. He'd looked at Brandon with such betrayal, realizing his friend had set him up. That look, Brandon said, had haunted him for 33 years. When Tyler had tried to run, Ashley had pursued him with the cold efficiency of someone protecting her family. Brandon had frozen, unable to help either side. The most damning evidence came from Ashley herself, inadvertently. In 2019, she'd given an oral history interview for the Park Service archives about her career. When discussing challenges facing the park in the early 1990s, she'd mentioned the problem of illegal dumping near Devil's Island, specifically citing chemical barrels found in late August 1991. But according to all official records, those barrels weren't discovered until September, after an anonymous tip. Ashley had known about them because Tyler had photographed them, photos she'd thought were destroyed forever. The trial preparations revealed more disturbing details. Ashley had kept newspaper clippings about Tyler's disappearance in a safety deposit box, along with his student ID that was supposedly lost in the lake. Investigators theorized she'd kept them as trophies, or perhaps as insurance against Brandon ever turning against her. She'd also kept the original August 15, 1991 entry from the Park Service boat log, which she was supposed to have filed but had reported as accidentally destroyed in a 1992 office flood that never happened. The Caldwell family farm, abandoned since 2010, was excavated by FBI evidence teams. They found remnants of the meth lab in the old barn, along with buried chemical containers that matched those in Tyler's photographs. A hidden room in the farmhouse basement contained records Tommy had kept of the drug operation, including payment ledgers that showed Ashley had received $50,000 for security services in September 1991. Tyler's parents, now in their 80s, lived to see justice. His mother, Patricia Olson, spoke at a press conference with remarkable composure. She'd always suspected the storm story was false. Tyler had been an expert kayaker who'd respected water safety above all else. He would never have gone out in threatening weather. She'd hired a private investigator in 1995, but the trail had been cold. The discovery of the dry bag had given her something she'd thought she'd never have: answers. Tyler's girlfriend from 1991, now married with children and grandchildren, came forward with her own piece of the puzzle. Tyler had mailed her a letter on August 14, 1991, which she'd kept all these years. In it, he'd written, "I've discovered something terrible happening in the islands. I'm going to document it tomorrow with Brandon, though I'm not sure I can trust him anymore. If anything happens to me, know that I love you and that I was trying to do the right thing." The letter had seemed like melodrama at the time, the kind of thing an idealistic young environmentalist might write. After Tyler's death, she'd thought it referred to the danger of kayaking. Only now did its true meaning become clear. The investigation also uncovered the extent of environmental damage from the illegal dumping. The EPA conducted extensive testing around the Apostle Islands, finding elevated levels of industrial chemicals in sediment layers from the early 1990s. The cleanup would cost millions. Tyler had been right about the ecological threat, even if he'd never known the full scope of the criminal enterprise behind it. In December 2024, Ashley Caldwell was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and racketeering. Minnesota charged Brandon Mueller with murder conspiracy and accessory after the fact. Wisconsin charged Derek Peterson with multiple environmental crimes and conspiracy. Tommy Caldwell faced federal drug charges, though his cooperation with authorities would likely result in a reduced sentence. Ashley's trial began in March 2025 in federal court in Madison. The prosecution presented a devastating case. The physical evidence was supported by a clear narrative of greed, family loyalty, and the cold-blooded elimination of a threat. Ashley's defense team tried to argue that Tyler's death had been accidental, that Ashley had tried to save him after the struggle. But the evidence of the sealed cave and the 33 years of lies made this implausible. Brandon Mueller testified for the prosecution, describing in detail the events of August 15, 1991. His testimony was devastating, particularly when he described Ashley's calm demeanor after Tyler's death, how she'd coached him on exactly what to say, how she'd threatened to implicate him in the drug operation if he ever spoke the truth. He'd been 26 years old, terrified, and in too deep to escape. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Ashley Caldwell, the respected superintendent, the environmental champion, the woman who'd spent 3 decades presenting herself as a guardian of nature, was revealed as a calculating killer who'd murdered an idealistic young scientist to protect a drug empire. At sentencing, Ashley finally spoke. She claimed she'd never intended for Tyler to die, that she'd been trying to protect her brother, her family's farm, their entire way of life. She spoke about the desperation of rural Wisconsin in the early 1990s, the farm crisis, the lack of opportunities, the returning veterans with no support. But when the judge asked her about the 33 years of lies, about attending Tyler's memorial service, about comforting his parents, she had no answer. The judge sentenced Ashley Caldwell to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Brandon Mueller received 25 years with the possibility of parole after 15, his cooperation considered. Derek Peterson got 15 years for environmental crimes and conspiracy. Tommy Caldwell, whose cooperation had been crucial and who hadn't been directly involved in the murder, received 5 years. The case's impact rippled far beyond the courtroom. The National Park Service initiated a comprehensive review of all cold cases in parks nationwide. Environmental groups used Tyler's story to push for stronger protections and whistleblower laws. The University of Wisconsin established the Tyler Olson Memorial Center for Environmental Justice, funded partly by the assets seized from Derek Peterson's criminal enterprise. In the end, it was the drought that had delivered justice. Climate change, the very force Tyler had been studying in 1991 through his research on lake ecosystems, had exposed his killer. The lake that had hidden the evidence for 33 years had finally given up its secrets. Tyler's waterproof bag, his final act of documenting the truth even as he faced death, had survived longer than his killer's carefully constructed lies. The Apostle Islands, once a crime scene hidden beneath Superior's cold waters, returned to being a place of natural beauty. But now they carried a different story too, a reminder that justice delayed is not always justice denied, that the truth has a way of surfacing, and that one young man's dedication to protecting the environment had ultimately exposed a web of corruption that might have otherwise continued indefinitely. Tyler Olson was finally laid to rest properly in Madison's Forest Hill Cemetery in a ceremony attended by hundreds. His research on Lake Superior ecosystems, recovered from university archives and Brandon's files, was posthumously. It showed a young scientist ahead of his time, already identifying in 1991 many of the climate change indicators that wouldn't become widely accepted for another decade. His legacy wasn't just in solving his own murder, but in the environmental protections his tragedy ultimately inspired. The last word went to Tyler himself from that microcassette found in the dry bag. The FBI released the full recording to his family, who shared one particular excerpt with the public. In it, Tyler's young voice, full of passion despite his fear, said, "The lakes are our heritage, our responsibility. Whatever happens to me, don't let them destroy these waters. Someone has to stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Especially when it's dangerous." 33 years late, someone finally had.